The last lecture dealt with the emergence of biomes and how do we get the biomes. Well, I keep pushing on the same two major factors. And here, a little bit different figure that can show us over here precipitation for the year, down here the average temperature. And so temperature in degrees centigrade, so over here 30 degrees centigrade. Our body temperature is at 37 degrees centigrade. So, it can be pretty warm up here and pretty cold down here. And then the annual precipitation, well, it's measured in centimeters. So 1, 2, 3, 400 centimeters, right? And so 100 centimeters gives you an entire meter stick, a little over 3 feet. And so you kind of get a sense of how much temperature, how much precipitation will get you like the tropical rainforest. And at the other extreme, there's the tundra, very low precipitation and very low temperatures. Okay, going on to the next page, we saw the distribution of the biomes. This figure you've seen before. And again, we look at how the sun is shining and causing evaporation and evapotranspiration to occur over the ocean and the continents. And we're getting all these air currents, and we're also getting ocean currents. That energy from the sun is impacting on the earth, and it's a flow of energy all around the earth as we try to, move that really warm air around the equator, and it goes a little bit north, 30 degrees north, 30 degrees south, at 60 degrees north and south. Again, you have more cells that are kind of giving us convection currents, and then, up at 90 degrees at the poles, north and south, again, you have the descending air from the convection currents. And so warm air going up with high humidity, the descending convection cells coming back down dry, right? Cooler and drier relative to the air that had come up, right? All right, and so you saw that. Hopefully this is kind of really kicking in, and we saw, something like this before when we were looking at the scientist Miriam, who was one of the first people who had really examined, the effect of altitude and vegetation and the biomes. And so we end up going through essentially a sequence of biomes. Instead of going from the equator to the North Pole, we're going from, sea level up to the top of a major mountain. And so, he was doing his research, Miriam, in California. And so you have those pictures there. And so there's this correspondence between altitude and the biomes. I wanted to take a quick look at this because, again, what are the two factors? What are the factors that really regulate what's going to be able to survive in a particular biome? And so again, we look temperature and precipitation. Let me see if I can. Okay, I got the focus a little bit better in now. When we look at the figures here, we're seeing the two major controls of what is going to occur within a biome. The abiotic factor of temperature and precipitation. And so we take a look at this. Temperature is going to be in red, precipitation in blue, and we see here San Diego, California, way out here. And so, just on the coast, and we take a look January, February, March, April, May, June, July, all the way to December. And what we see is, well, when we look at the temperature, it pretty much, it gets warmer in the summer, but never really gets all that cold, never gets really horribly hot either. People like to live in San Diego. And then we look precipitation, mostly in the winter and spring, goes way down in the summer, then way back up. And so the brown here, evaporation, right? Because we have high temperatures and we don't have a whole lot of water falling. And so what water there is tends to evaporate. And so when you see this, kind of brownish bit here, kind of gives you the idea that, well, maybe you might be heading toward kind of a desert situation. All right, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, basically on the other side of the United States here, on the East Coast. And what we see here, the temperatures in January, in December, very cold. And then look at that, June, July, August, a little bit warmer, but we have precipitation. So you're going to get a good amount of snow in the winter. You're going to end up having that snow melt in the spring. Got all kinds of runoff. You got, a lot of water in the summer. If you look around in the Philadelphia area, this region, highly productive as far as, growing vegetables and corn and the kinds of crops that, the earliest settlers would have wanted. Now down here, we're taking a look somewhere in Brazil, and we're seeing, we're on the equator. Temperatures, pretty equitable, doesn't really change a whole lot. I mean, we see over here degrees centigrade, maybe 26 on average. They're averaging the monthly temperatures all through here. And the average of the monthly rainfall, really high rainfall, and drops way down, but never gets so far down that we're going to have a whole lot of evapotranspiration. We're not going to lose water from the system. Then comes right back up. And so, let's see, I wanted to head toward the tundra here. I wanted to show you the tundra. And so, here it is, a picture showing us kind of a tundra landscape. There's the pooled water. The water cannot sink through the permafrost, frozen underneath. And we take a look. -20, -30. These are averages for the month. So -25 degrees in January, -27 in February. And so, well, then we get up. When does it get above zero, right? All right, and so 0 degrees here in June, July, August, maybe in September, the average is still right around 0. And so when we're looking at centigrade, remember, 0 degrees is when you melt. 100 degrees is when you boil. So this is equal to our 32 degree Fahrenheit. All right, so these are the growing months. Compare that to that Brazil with a tropical, and basically you had growth year round. Here, it's just very short growth. And so abiotic factors that are going to affect what can be in a biome. And so now we're going to look at biotic factors. The biotic factors are also going to affect what can live here, what can live there. And so, we take a look and we see, biota, the living organisms, they can store nutrients, they can use nutrients. Of course, we need to take nutrients from our potato or our asparagus or our cow or pig. We're taking their nutrients that they gathered and we're using it ourselves. And so, well, we store calcium in our bones, and we take it in and out as the day goes on. Sometimes we're extracting calcium, sometimes you're depositing it, and as long as you keep it in balance, you're okay. You don't want to take too much calcium out. As people get old, osteoporosis, right? Osteoporosis, you've been taking out too much calcium and your bones start getting brittle, right? All right, there's calcium in limestone. We think about all those shells. We think about all the reefs, those little animals there secreting limestone, and it's calcium carbonate that they're secreting to make their little houses or the little platform that they're sitting on. If you're a little sea anemone or a coral, or if you're an oyster or a mussel, you're utilizing calcium carbonate. Just so that you keep in mind phosphate. Remember we had mentioned, hey, it's a fertilizer. Well, bat guano, bat poop, right? It accumulates in the bottom of caves. You can basically go in and shovel it out and use it as a manure because it has a lot of nutrients that plants will need: the phosphate, the nitrogen, and the potassium, right? Okay, we look and we see, in addition, the biota, they can release moisture. Cactus, they're a particular kind of plant that is not going to have a whole lot of evapotranspiration going on. The evapotranspiration, the sun radiation warming that plant up, and if that plant is trying to photosynthesize, it has to open all the little stoma on the bottom of the leaves, the stoma, the melts, all these little openings, and in comes the CO2. They're pulling water up from the roots, and with the water and the CO2, let's photosynthesize and make sugar. If it's way too hot, then you're going to end up having a lot of evaporation, transpiring out of that plant if it's photosynthesized. So often when it's really, really hot, really, really bright outside, plants will end up shutting down. And so, they don't have their stoma open, they don't lose water. And cactus are real good at this. Let's reduce our need for leaves and just photosynthesize basically in a thick, heavy stem. And sure, we need to open up and get some CO2 and all of that, but let's do it during maybe the part of the day when it isn't so blistering hot that we're going to lose all our water. And so it's kind of nice if you need to have a little bit of moisture, a little desert rat or a mouse can always go to the cactus and start chewing on it, right? Of course, it got all the thorns there, the needles to prevent things like that, but there is that water inside. All right, here, I'm taking us into a whole nother realm of, or level of how biota affects each other, the distribution of other organisms. And so what's going on here? They're talking about a major event, the great oxygen event, the great oxygen revolution, the oxygen catastrophe, the oxygen holocaust, right? Now, we weren't around for this. This all occurred long, long before any of us were around. This is a couple, billion years ago, starting about 2.4, going to about 2 billion years ago. This event occurred. And what was going on? Well, we had this group of organisms, cyanobacteria, what we call blue-green algae before, but we'll call them cyanobacteria, right? Blue-green algae. And what do? They eliminate oxygen. So you go back before, 2.5 million years or so, or 2.5 billion years or so, and the Earth, which, about 4.5 billion years old, for the first couple, 2.5 billion years, hot molten mass, and then, it cooled enough, and we could start getting, anaerobic organisms, anaerobic bacteria that could live there. There weren't much for oxygen. There wasn't much for oxygen. And so here, all of a sudden, a new kind of bacteria come up, and they're producing oxygen, right? They're eliminating it from their tiny little bodies. They're photosynthetic. And so, what's the cast-off material from photosynthesis? Oxygen. And so now, you had a planet early on where you really didn't have much oxygen unbound, right? There might have been oxygen bound up with a silica, giving us, our silicic rocks and stuff, but unbound in the ocean waters, in the atmosphere, it would have been almost nothing. And then when these guys start producing, they basically are polluting. They're putting a toxic material, oxygen, it oxidizes. It wants to combine with other elements. And so when it does that, it tends to tear apart, say, your lungs if you have a really high oxygen concentration. Today, we've got about 20% oxygen in our atmosphere. But back then, it would have started out as 0%. Then it would have headed up, getting around to 1%. And that's when the big catastrophe, the Holocaust, that's when it would have really occurred. When we get to about 1%, because now that's killing off a huge amount of the biodiversity on the planet. And it's about the same time that we see, the red-banded formation. All the oxygen that had been being produced up to this point had combined with iron. And so now we look around the world and we see in this 2 billion year old sediment, red, iron oxides. And so iron oxides turn red. All right. And so basically it killed off the basic bacteria that we had before that. The cyanobacteria, well, they could kind of deal with it, having a little bit of oxygen around. But at some point in here, we get a symbiosis. And so this is the endosymbiotic hypothesis. And the person, Lynn Margulis, she was one of the people that was real important in putting this forth in the 1970s. How did we get prokaryotic organisms to turn into eukaryotic? So prokaryotic, well, they didn't have a real nice nucleus with all their DNA kind of wrapped around a nice membrane, all that. But the eukaryotes do. And one of the other main things about the eukaryotes, they have mitochondria. And so if you have a symbiosis, some bacteria swallows a living organism that is capable of producing energy and throwing off oxygen, right? Utilizing oxygen rather, not throwing it off, utilizing oxygen and creating the ATPs that we need. That little organism, if it's swallowed by a bacteria, engulfed, they might be living together, right? One inside the other in a symbiotic, right? So sym, together, bios. They're getting along together. They're helping each other. The mitochondria that we have in our cells today, they're producing the ATPs. They're giving us the Krebs cycle, breaking down the sugars so that we're doing just fine. And the bacteria, they're going around, bacteria that are now the eukaryotes, these one-celled organisms are going around basically finding the raw materials and stuff that are going to be necessary for the internal mitochondria. And so now we have this real good oxygen-based metabolism going on. And so we keep going forward in time. And about 600 million years ago, a little bit before that, we're going to find that the oxygen buildup has gone, it's been increasing. And then at some point, it gets to be 10%, 1% down there. And that's when we had the catastrophe at 1%. And then 600 million years ago, this is when you had the Cambrian explosion. And so O2 levels go up, since until today, it's about 20%, right? And there's been all kinds of other things going on with oxygen because there have been sinks and reservoirs where the oxygen gets sucked in and released at times. You know, but what is important about the Cambrian explosion is now you're at this 10% level. And so at that point, diffusion through a multicellular organism just might work. And so first you had all these kind of flat, small organisms where oxygen could diffuse in through the entire body pretty well. But then, you know, somewhere around when you get 10%, now you can get more elaborate, larger organisms. And so this is when we begin to see in the Cambrian organisms really diversifying into all different body plans, all the major phyla that we expect to see in the world today. That's about when they started, plus a whole lot of phyla that, you know, never made it, you know, occurred just before the Cambrian. But the key was you had a lot of oxygen. That catastrophe for the prokaryotes ended up being, you know, a boon for us eukaryotes. We are eukaryotes. All the vertebrates, all the animals are basically eukaryotes, and, you know, plants, eukaryotes. And so, you know, the other main thing I probably should have mentioned, you had that oxygen. It, of course, was filling the oceans at first. Then it got into the atmosphere. Once you get into the atmosphere, some of it's going to go way up, and it's going to help form an ozone layer. And so that ozone layer is going to protect the organisms that are coming out onto the surface, coming out on land, so that basically you do not fry up from all that ultraviolet radiation. And so now we can have plants going on land and little animals coming out on land, and we can have life on land. And so here, the biota made a huge, amazing difference at a worldwide scale. Okay, that's kind of the big lesson there. Okay, I had previously talked about, you know, feeding levels, the trophic levels, right? Trophic feeding. And so when we look at biotas, well, we got to have the base level of producers and consumers with the herbivore carnivores. And so when we look at all of this, what we're seeing is the flow of energy, the flow of materials, right? The macronutrients, the biomass, right? Because the macronutrients and the micronutrients and all whatever makes up the body, that's going to weigh something. That's the biomass. The productivity, right? How much of the biomass, how much of the energy do you convert from one level to another? And, you know, we want to be able to see energy, materials, productivity flowing through the system, flowing through the producers, the herbivores, and the carnivores. And so there's a lot of other things that kind of go along with everything like that here. Pyramid of numbers, pyramid of biomass, pyramid of energy. When we look at producers, they have the most energy, they have the most biomass, and they have the most number. The number of species, the number of individuals, how many blades of grass are out there on the lawn. Well, it's going to be far more than there are sheep, or far more than there are people. And so, well, here, rabbits, how many rabbits are there? Not that many compared to the plant. How many for biomass? You start weighing up all the rabbits, not that many compared to grass. How much energy, if you put them into calorimeter and burnt them up, well, the little rabbits would throw off this amount of energy, but if you burnt all the plants, you get a huge amount. Now, what if you look at the third level? Here's the carnivore, and we see a dramatic, right? A drastic reduction in all those numbers. Okay, so we got the producers over here. Producers, some of them are consumed, some of them are not consumed. So this represents the primary productivity, the producers. Some of them, you know, the sheep eats the grass, they're consumed. And so now we look, what happens to that sheep? Here, this represents a sheep. The sheep will digest some of the material. The sheep will pass some of the material through. And so that undigested, fecal waste, all right? And so it just poops it out, and well, it goes back and kind of feeds the plants. Kind of a nice way to do it. But what has been digested, this is going to represent the energy. You're taking those bonds that, you know, like the sugar molecules or whatever molecules are being broken down, you break those bonds apart and you can make the ATP. So it's your energy. But what happens? Energy for body activity. You need to be able to transport, you know, things through your body, active transports to keep balance. You need to produce heat to keep your metabolism up if you're a mammal. And so you're losing a lot of energy just by, you know, doing something as simple as breaking down the grass that you've eaten. You got to break it down, and that takes energy. Churning of the stomach, adding chemicals, you know, acids and enzymes into the mix so that you can absorb and actively absorb using ATP to pull that food in across the intestinal membrane. So a lot of energy just doesn't actually get converted into your body, but some does. And so for that sheep right here, this represents the body. How much goes into making that sheep grow bigger, make wool, whatever it is. Now, somewhere along the line, the sheep gets eaten. A pack of wolves, or well, maybe people come by and they eat the sheep or whatever. And so here we have the carnivore. And so the biomass of the carnivore, well, some of it's going to be consumed, and of that consumption, some becomes energy that gets lost in the conversion of the food, gets lost in the metabolism of the body, gets lost as heat. Some ends up going and forming the actual body of the predator, right? And so that's all that's left. Notice that you have maybe like a tenth of the biomass of the sheep, and of the sheep, a tenth of the biomass of the producer down here of the plants. And so, you know, also here we have some unconsumed. You know, you take a look at the sheep, well, you might not be eating the snout, you might not be eating the wool, you probably couldn't chew down the bones. Wolf might be able to do it, but, you know, we wouldn't eat the bones. And so there's some that doesn't get incorporated into our processing to make our body as we eat. All right, so you saw that. The process of converting from one level to the other has to be measured somehow. It's science. You got to measure, quantify it. And so the productivity that we saw, that what makes the biomass from one organism transfer to another organism, that's productivity, conversion from one level to another. And so biomass, we'll use that as our proxy for productivity. And so the dry mass is what we're really interested in when we're looking at the biomass. If we have a person, well, 85% of them is going to be water, right? So mostly water. We have a whole lot of blood, but, you know, some of that solid, well, we'll keep as biomass. But the pumpkin, look at that, 98% water. And so, you know, what's left, that 15, that 2%, that's actually the real biomass that somehow had been converted from the sugar molecules into the body of the organism. And so you desiccate it, that dry mass ends up being what we'll think of as a good measure of biomass. And so when we go to a plant, to an animal, yeah, we're looking at what had actually been converted, not, well, did he drink a whole lot of water? Okay, and so primary productivity. This is going to be the producer's game plan. Let's convert the sun energy into chemical energy. So photosynthesis, and we're coming up with the sugar, the starches that we're putting into the potato, into the rice grain, whatever it is that we're making, all right? And so all the energy converted by the producers from the sun energy into chemical. And, this is going to be for, a growth season maybe, or a month or a day, whatever time period you're working on. Now the net is all the energy that has been converted and stored by that primary producer, okay? And so just like, all of these, well, if you're the sheep, some of it is digested. Well, some of that ends up having to maintain your body, and some of it ends up building your body. The same thing for the plants. The plants, they have to have metabolic cost. They have to run that photosynthetic machinery. They have to pull the water up from the roots. They have to open the stoma to let the CO2 in. And so there's all kinds of energy being used, and that's going to be from the gross. I mean, you've made the sugar, but now you got to use some of that sugar to keep the photosynthesis going, to keep the metabolic processes going. And so we subtract all that extraneous energy that didn't really end up being put into the body, put into the plant body. And then what we get is the net productivity. And so let's see. If you think of it, here, anybody who ends up going and working for a living, well, you've got your gross pay. How much do they pay you a week? Maybe you get a couple $100 a week in pay. That's what your gross is. But then you pay federal taxes, state taxes, Social Security, and maybe you're putting into your retirement, your benefits, or health care. And so that $200 a week now ends up being only like $162. And so that 162, after you throw out all the necessary in order to maintain, your work life, that's your net pay. So net pay, net productivity, it's what's left over after the expenses. And so look at the girth, right? How fat, how thin, gross and net. When we look at different organisms, it ends up that different organisms, they have different efficiencies in converting their energy into body mass. And so something like algae, right? Little unicellular, 50%, right? It only takes them about 50% of all that energy that they get coming into their little bodies to convert. When we look at a tree, it's only 10%. You got, 100% of the energy coming into the tree, all that photosynthesis going on, only 10% of that energy gets converted into the sugars, the starch, the carbohydrates that make new tree, just 10% new tree. So there's different kinds of efficiencies, particularly in the plants. Let's go to the next page. Now, second productivity. This is where we're going up the pyramids. We're going to the next trophic level. And so, again, we were going through that business of it requires energy to metabolize and assimilate the biomass. We can look with this chart, it's a little bit different one than we had before. And so kilojoules, that's the energy notation of physics type people, the hard sciences, engineers, physicists. They will talk about energy in kilojoules, or, well, joules, kilo for 1,000 joules. And so if producers are making like, oh, this many 97,000 kilojoules of energy, it ends up, here you go, here's the sheep, the primary consumer. It's only becoming 7,000 kilojoules in its net, right? In its conversion into body mass. Secondary, oh my goodness, that's less than 10%, 600 versus 7,000, that's less than 10%. And then here, tertiary, 50 kilo, well, that's less than 10%. We tend to go with 10%, but we look producers, primary, secondary, tertiary consumers. Up here, this would be the top apex predator. And, as we see the biomass, as we see all the energy going, less and less as we go up, then, one of the things that we need to be aware of is we really can't have too many top carnivores. And so here, the jaguar. We look at the jaguar, or a mountain lion or something like that. A top carnivore, it's eaten, at the top of the food chain, like 3, 4, 5 levels up, trophic levels. And when you're up that high, the pyramid has just, of mass, of what you can eat, has gotten so small that you need this huge territory. And so, yeah, jaguar, how big is it? But it needs, 250 square miles. And this is down in the tropics where you have incredible diversity, lots of animals that it could eat. If you're a top carnivore, then that pyramid, well, drops pretty quickly from, 100 to 10% to 1% to, oh my goodness, less than 1% to 0.1%, right? And so you can't go up too many trophic levels. Well, let's take a look. We got endotherms and ectotherms. So look at animals that we're familiar with, and we see here's a scale of body temperature versus ambient temperature. Ambient is environmental temperature. And so freezing, 40 degrees, again, Celsius. 37 degrees, that's our body temperature, okay? Oh, wait a minute, yeah. All right, so yeah, we're still looking at temperature, but this is on a cold December day. This is on a really hot August day. Now the body temperature. If we look at something like a mammal, if we look at a bird, the bobcat is going to maintain a body temperature around 37 degrees centigrade all the time. It doesn't matter, whether it's cold out, whether it's hot out, it has to maintain that high body temperature. It can't go hypothermic, it will die. This is a snake, and it's an ectotherm, okay? So endo, we have temperature that is regulated within our body. We break down fats and sugars to maintain our body temperature, to generate heat. Here, the ectotherm, they have to rely on an outside source for heat. And so snakes, well, you'll find them basking in the sun. You'll find, the little lizard basking in the sun. The toad, right? They'll bask in. The fish, well, whatever the temperature of the water is, that's the temperature of the fish. If it's a cold, cold day, then, and the water is cold in the middle of winter, then the fish are sluggish. They're way down at the bottom of the pond, just kind of waiting out until the temperatures come back so that they can swim around and grow fat again. All right. So ectotherms, they rely on the ambient temperature, the environmental temperature. And so if it's really, really cold out, the snake is going to burrow, get away from freezing temperatures of snow, going to get underground, kind of hibernate there for a while. It's cold, it cannot move. If you're going to go into a den of rattlesnakes, go during the winter. They're not going to be able to do a whole lot to you. But if it's the middle of summer, well, all those rattlesnakes, they're going to be warm. They're going to be active. And so, you got to be real careful around, snakes during the middle of the summer because they are ready to go. Well, okay, maybe not in the middle of the night, might be a little colder, but, the little lizards, the snakes, they'll sun themselves in the morning and get their metabolism up so they can go look for their food, their little insects or mice or whatever they're going to eat. Okay, so let's see, endotherms. We tend to think of ourselves as kind of the epitome of how wonderful it is, and so shouldn't everything be an endotherm? Well, birds and mammals think so, but the problem is, if you're going to be an endotherm, you got to eat constantly. And so, we're used to 3 meals a day, plus a little snacks and, on and on and on. You look at an ectotherm, if you want to go away, you have, your guppies in the fish tank. You got your pet snake in a fish tank too, a terrarium. These things, you can leave them for a month and you're probably better off because somebody might overfeed them and they might not do well overfed. So, if they are cool enough, they will have a low feeding rate. They don't need to be running around and their lives tend to be longer. You think about the tortoises. They have low metabolism. They have long life. The higher your metabolism, if you're a tiny little hummingbird, if you're a tiny little mouse and your heart is beating, a couple hundred beats per minute, that hummingbird, might last a couple of years, but it isn't going to be a 70-year-old hummingbird, right? And so being an endotherm, we like it, but it isn't necessarily the best adaptation for all conditions. All right, when we look at the trophic efficiencies, when we look at, the secondary consumers, you think, maybe about 10% average, 5 to 20%, but 10% average. And you can kind of see the difference in some of the animals. Here's a horse, right? And so that is actually a wild horse, Przewalski's horse, not a tamed horse. And then not that many left in the wild. And then of course down here, these are cows, right? So you got your cow, you got your horse. And they're both, herbivores, eating grass and stuff like that. But the horse, well, you might end up having to feed a little bit more grain. Let's look at what comes out of the other end. And so we take a look at the horse and, well, you can always see little sticks and straw sticking out of it. These guys, they use the hind gut to absorb most of their food, and they don't do it very efficiently. Whereas you look at the cow over here, and they have a really efficient digestive system. You got all the stomachs breaking things down before it even gets into, the real intestinal areas. And then as it goes through, you're basically just sucking out pretty much anything that's really good and useful. And so you take a look at this, and you got a lot less nutrients than over here. Not as efficient, much more efficient. You look at little animals, rabbits, guinea pigs, things like that, herbivores, they don't have a real good efficiency either. But what a lot of them will do will be coprophagy. And so if you see them kind of having their head down between their legs, in all likelihood they're eating little pellets that are coming out because they went through the digestive system once, and if they can go through twice, they can extract that second time around all kinds of good nutrients that had gone out into that pellet. And then the second time around, that pellet comes out, and that second pellet, after the second pass, tends to be a little bit more denser and smaller than the first pellet. And so, yeah, rabbits, guinea pigs, things like that. Yeah, kind of gross, but it works for them. They're happy. Before I leave here, let's take a look at a few other pictures just to show. Here's the endotherm, and activity cost, growth, temperature regulation, reproduction here, and basal metabolic rate for the 60 kilogram human female. 800,000 kilocalories per year to maintain this individual. Over here, here's a penguin, a whole lot less calorie. Well, still maintaining that 37 degrees centigrade, but, just like the mammal, the bird. And then over here, 37 degrees centigrade. Yeah, but small. So big versus small, lots of calories, less calories. You can have a whole lot more mice than you can humans on Earth, right? The Earth can support so many more little tiny mice. Then look over here, the python. That's a pretty big python, and it's the same size as this, by mass as the penguin, 340,000 versus 8,000. This guy, ectotherm. These all endo. Ectotherm. If it's going to be hard to find food, if you're going to be going through times of famine, you don't want to be a high metabolizing organism. You want to be an ectotherm. And so again, everything depends on the kind of environment that you're living in. Let's see. Now, all right, we'll just take a quick look at that. The tundra biome, producers down here, all kinds of vegetation during that 3 months, and then, lemons, insects, and muskox. Well, they're eating all of this. And then Arctic fox, snowy owl. Maybe we can throw in a polar bear or something that might eat a young or an old muskox just for fun, or, well, seals or whatever, but they're off in the ocean. In any case, we see the food web here, and it's a pretty simple one compared to most other biomes. Now, kind of an interesting thing. We look at a baleen whale, and we look at a herring. The baleen whales, those cetaceans, the baleen cetaceans, they end up being about the biggest organisms that have ever lived on Earth. Bigger than the dinosaurs. These guys, they're living in the ocean, they're being buoyed up by the ocean waters, and they are just massive, much bigger than any of the dinosaurs. So, some whales are small, but a lot of the whales are real big. The ones that get big, they have baleen. And what's that? It's basically a keratinized tissue. Our hair is keratinized, our fingernails are keratinized. But what we see here are what appear to be like vertical blinds, right? You have your window covering with vertical blinds, and it's just hanging off the roof of the mouth here. Great big tongue down here, huge tongue. This whale will find some sort of school of food, whatever it is that it's trying to eat. When we think about the baleen whales, we often think about Antarctica. We think about the krill, little tiny crustaceans. And so what does it do? But it opens its mouth and drives itself into that school of whatever it is, that bunch of plankton, the bunch of krill, whatever is there in this huge mass, this huge biomass that kind of gathered together. And then here it is, its mouth is full of water and full of, say, the crustaceans, the little shrimp-like animals. And then it just pushes the tongue up, it closes the mouth, and it basically strains through these vertical blinds the water out of the mouth, and then swallowing the krill. right? And so when we look at that, if you want to be the biggest animal on earth, you can't go around trying to eat sharks or tuna. You know, they're too high up on the food chain. You know, there are not that many of them. And so you got to go to where there's huge biomass, and that's going to be close to the primary producers. And, you know, here, you know, plankton will be eaten by the krill. Okay, so, yeah, but we're basically looking, you know, at a very short trophic jump here. When we look at herring, we can see a school of herring, you know, in the millions. They'll swim around in the millions, and they will basically have the same biomass as one of these huge, huge whales. And when we look at a heron and when we look at a whale, they're feeding pretty much at that same producer level. All right. Okay, a little bit of exaggeration, but you know, here we have just a huge mass of heron. We're, you know, some skin diver with a camera is in the ocean, and the herons have all just kind of parted ways, and we're seeing just that huge school. And these schools will be cruising the ocean until they find these masses of plankton, and then they'll eat them. Here, you know, you got, you know, something like a bunch of dolphin, and they're under the ocean surface here, and they're kind of cruising along, and they find that heron school, and then how do you escape from the dolphin? Well, maybe if you just jumped out of the water for a second or two. If the dolphin had been chasing you, they might lose sight of you. You're not in the water anymore. And so, again, it's to illustrate that these fish, you know, they're trying to be safe. They're trying to not get eaten. And so if you're in a big herd, if you're in a big school of fish, then you might not get eaten quite as badly. All right. And so, you know, thinking next about, you know, the food chain and the trophic levels, here, you know, we can look at things like hot dogs, and, you know, you got your veggie, right, protein links, the smart dogs made out of soybeans or whatever. And so you can eat these. They may not taste wonderful, but you can eat them if you put enough mustard or whatever you like on them. And you're eating at the lower trophic level, right? You're doing a much more efficient conversion from one level to the next. Here's a corn dog. And so when we, you know, look at a corn dog, yes, it's greatness in the culinary arts, deep fried in some kind of, you know, beef tallow or pork fat. And so, you know, there you have to have the fat, which is coming at a higher level. You got the corn. Okay, well, you know, that's at the primary productivity. But then you look and you see the hot dog, you know, because you don't make a corn dog out of a soy dog. You make the corn dog out of some kind of, you know, the snouts and tails and whatnot of the leftover butchered animal. Higher in general than the trophic primary producers. And so, you know, other things, yeah, you got your hamburger and the little children. Oh yes, they want to eat the higher level, trophic level. They don't want to go all the way down to the primary producers. They'd probably pick off all the lettuce and the peppers and the onion there, because that's all primary, right? All direct change from sun energy into some kind of carbohydrate, right? Spam, again, we can get Spam hot dogs now, right? So technology, you know, culinary arts, keep moving forward. We used to only be able to get Spam, smoked pork shoulder and ham or something like that in a can, and you cut it off, fry it. That's the best way. Some people will eat it you know, without cooking it, because it was already, you know, processed. It was cooked. But again, high trophic level. You're taking meat and you're doing so. You can now find foods that actually do not contain any real substance, right? That are undigestible. And you know, there was an old television show, Married with Children, where they had a little episode with a food product called Weenie Tots, and essentially Weenie Tots, you know, no animal, no plant. It was who knows what made it up, you know, but it would have probably been an abiotic. And then if I give away the ending, it's basically, well, they got all their Weenie Tots, but if you opened the Weenie Tot container and didn't consume it right away, they disintegrated. And so here we have Twinkies, and so I'll just show you Twinkies because, you know, when we look at the food, it's not just the trophic level that affects how efficient things are, but it's also going to be the processing. And so if you look, you see the Twinkies being manufactured here. Who doesn't like a Twinkie, right? Twinkies are wonderful. But here, Twinkies deconstructed. And so we take a look over here, raw materials, and then these are the ingredients that go into a Twinkie. And so that little cake with the cream filling has all of this. I mean, somehow, you know, these guys in the manufacturing plant, they've got all this stuff that they're dumping together, and somehow, in the end, the miracle of a Twinkie gets made. And so we take a look and we see where do all these things come from? Oh, animals, you know, chicken, cows. Oh, well, but bacteria, yeast, and fungi. These actually are three different kingdoms and are not the animal kingdom. So, I mean, this is a huge diversity when you're getting fungi, yeast, and bacteria to be in your Twinkie, along with, you know, I mean, who thought that a Twinkie would have, you know, chickens or cows somehow incorporated into it? I mean, you can look over here and, yeah, maybe it's kind of a semi, well, okay, looks like it might be casein, you know, ground up hooves and bones and stuff. But, well, in any case, there's a little bit of cow in there. All kinds of plant material, all right? You know, sugar beets and sugar canes giving us sugar. Vanilla, okay, that seems okay. Trees giving us cellulose gum, right? And so minerals. Now we got to dig into the earth. Yep, let's grind up some limestone, right? Some phosphorus, salt. That's an easy one. We all know salt. Iron and water and sulfur and air. Yeah, I don't know how air gets to be a mineral, but that's okay. We'll go along with it. But we just see an incredible amount of energy going into the mixing. Well, just finding all these materials, the mixing, the energy. Here's the 37 ingredients that go into making a Twinkie. So down here, there's where they are. And so you could somehow separate this all out into, well, where okay, there's soybean, cottonseed, canola, beef fat. Okay, there's where some of the beef comes from. You know, dairy whey, right? And so you could figure out where a lot of the individual ingredients have come from. And let's see. Oh, well, just kind of a little cartoon. Because there was a time when, well, maybe we should get rid of the Twinkie. Why make Twinkies anymore? And so, you know, there were actually protests to, you know, save the Twinkie, make sure that they did not stop manufacturing the Twinkie. Whereas, well, you know, how many people show up for climate change or anything like that? Okay, so when we look at the energy cost, it's not just trophic level, but also how much processing, right? An apple, you just pick it off the tree. an apple pie, well, you're expending energy, you're cooking that apple, you're mixing the ingredients with a blender. There's a lot more energy going in. If you just go pick the apple, well, you know, I've picked the apple, but here I got to stir the pie, I got to move it around in the kitchen. Yeah. And then I look at the Twinkie, and that's kind of, you know, just imagine how much effort and energy goes into making a Twinkie, gathering up all those materials. Okay, that takes us through this part where we're dealing with just what effects the biota can have on the other organisms in the biome. Okay, so we had the abiotic, then we went to the biotic. And that's good enough for now. I'll talk to you next time.